Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is James Copley. No Phil Smith today, no Jason Jones today, but I'm delighted to be joined by a very special guest, Daniel Storey from the newspaper. Daniel, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We're going to talk about the Preston North End game shortly, which you attended last night. But please tell me about this fantastic undertaking that you are going around the 92 clubs in Britain and all of that. Tell me about it. It's incredible. I've been following it closely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So, I'm doing the 92, which I think most listeners will know about as a thing. Try and tick them off, go and watch Sunderland away. Doing that. I'm trying to do it in the space of a single season. And as part of my job, also doing a detailed piece on each of the 92 clubs and just trying to cover kind of the beauty of English league football in general. I have been guilty in the past of just kind of moaning about what's wrong with English football, and I think actually the other way might work better, which is to go around and say what's brilliant about it. So yeah, Sunderland Preston Tuesday night was number 77 of 92.
It's really impressive and an incredible undertaking. I've got one question though, having worked in the industry for a little while. How on earth did you pitch that, and how on earth did you manage to get the funding for it?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I first pitched it about 2 or 3 years ago, at which point my editor was like, "Yeah, there's a World Cup in the middle of this season, so you've got no chance." Uh, I think it probably came out of a kind of sort of lockdown fever or post-lockdown fever. I was like, right, I just want to see as much football live as I can, and we noticed that there was decent, interest in EFL stories. National doesn't cover the Championship get covered. To a full extent. And I also think that English football sits at the precipice of a really interesting, in inverted commas, time in terms of finances and independent regulator and that sort of stuff. So it was kind of the perfect season to do it. Also, with the change in format of the Champions League, left everyone feeling a bit like unsure about that would look like. So yeah, I think 24-25 was the perfect season, and it's gone really well. So I'm glad we did it.
Has it had its ups and downs? Because that's a lot of travelling. I speak from experience. I'm a Sunderland fan covering Sunderland. I love it, but sometimes when you're coming back from somewhere on a Tuesday night, having watched a pretty drab game in the cold, it can get on top of you a little bit. How have you found it generally?
Yeah, it's been okay. I've tried to use trains as much as I can because I think that kind of sort of Alan Partridge vibe of just sat in a car at midnight driving up to a closed motorway junction is really, yeah, that's when it'll get you. Sunderland actually weirdly is one of the mishaps in that I was coming up for a game in January, which uh, so the weather where I live in Nottingham was fine and the weather in Sunderland was fine, but it was that weekend where almost every game was called off and the weather in Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, wasn't fine. So I kind of got halfway and had to come back. So this was a rearranged game to come in. A couple of those, and it's a good story. Any more than that, and it would have been, it would have been a problem. But I hope we're out of that weather now.
Absolutely, and in some of the pieces I've read of yours, I haven't read them all, but I've read a smattering of them for sure. You've been granted a lot of access, particularly at some of the lower league clubs. What are some of the best stories you've found, and I guess how accommodating to you have Sunderland been? Have you managed to get a peek behind the scenes, or has it just sort of been watching as a layman?
So for Sunderland, the idea was always sort of stemming from last season when Sunderland had the youngest average age team in the country. I think Peterborough have since overtaken that this season because of a slight, a little bit more experience in the Sunderland team. But adding in Reggie and, Sunderland are going to finish higher than any other, probably going to finish higher than any other team in the country that doesn't have Premier League money or parachute payment money. The highest in the 92 of any team. And I know that might not feel relevant in the context of, oh God, we're going to be in the top four for most of the season, and then it's probably about playoffs, and then it's like that whole existential angst. I get that that's the focus, but I get the chance to take a step back, right, and say, hang on, what's been achieved here in the last couple of years is pretty astonishing, and particularly given where the club has come from over the last decade. I think it's a good news story, and I know that if Sunderland lose in the playoff semis or the playoff final, then everyone will kind of lose their minds because I'm a Forest fan and we had that for 15 years as well. Like that's just how it goes, and that's a really difficult time to take a step back. But I think it's worth doing. The progress has been extraordinary. It's a really likable team. It has really likable young players in it. Yes, it doesn't always click. Yes, there's occasional, oh, we look a bit blunt here, and we'll come on to Preston last night. It's a good news story in a division where they can be quite hard to find.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear that sort of filter through to the national press. Obviously, there's a couple of names at Sunderland, the likes of Joe Bellingham, Chris Rigg. I want to talk to you a bit about the Premier League, Daniel. Obviously, with you being a Nottingham Forest fan, to be honest, I've never covered a club in the Premier League. It scares me. The finances scare me. Sunderland's accounts came out recently, and they're making an £8 million loss, which isn't so bad when you consider that the average losses for clubs in the Championship can be 15, 20 million. I think the entirety of the losses combined is something like 200 or 300 million. It is very hard to get promoted from the Championship to the Premier League without parachute payments, isn't it?
It is, and it's even harder to stay there. I know over the last couple of seasons we've seen, we saw all three promoted clubs go down last season. We're going to see probably all three promoted clubs go down this season. I think a few weeks ago, you'd have asked me that question, I'd have said that Leeds United are probably the litmus test for this, in that I think if they go up and also struggle again and come down again, then I think it sends a really worrying message about how to do that, because they're a massive club with big revenues, with a new owner that will spend, with the power to attract high-end players, I think, or higher-end players than most promoted clubs. So if they go up and don't come down, then fine. If they come down, then I think we have a problem. And look, I'm lucky in that my team has not just managed to consolidate there, but is having this mad season, most of which or nearly all of which I'm missing. But
I didn't think of that actually. That's a
yeah. So the only game I've been to so far is Man City away, and we got battered 3-0. So I've made my peace with not going to any more games until the final day of the season. But it's taken a heck of a lot of money. That they have spent a huge amount of money on players. They have had to risk, because if that had gone wrong, both in terms of like FFP, PSR, and and things just falling apart, then it was really hard to get back there. And I don't really know what we do. I don't think we're in a situation yet, thankfully, where clubs like Sunderland are thinking, what's the point in going up? Because I think the Premier League still holds this kind of, not just a mystique for supporters, but you're seeing the best players, the ground will be full. It is a chance to pit yourself against the best. You can consolidate there, which Sunderland know from 90s, 2000s football is possible to do without it constantly being a slog. But give it a few more years and this conversation might be a little bit different, I think, unless something changes.
The financial gap between the Championship and the Premier League is extraordinary. I was talking to Kieran Maguire. He put a figure on promotion for Sunderland at about 198 million. And that's coming straight back down as well, which is crazy. How, in your opinion, Daniel, do we bridge that gap? Because it feels to me there needs to be a little bit more trickle down economics. Rick Parry's in the news this week speaking about what he would like to happen. There's the football governance bill. It's all very political and it's all very murky as well, it feels, at the moment.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. The redistribution of wealth is the way to do it. But these things are infinitely harder to do retrospectively than they are if you're starting from fresh. And football is not a start from fresh game. There's always another season. There's always a last season. So you don't get a kind of line in the sand moment. This is as close as we're going to get to that. But effectively, you are asking for some turkeys to vote for Christmas in the Premier League. And for the good of the game, they should do that. And there will be owners in that league, and there will be decision makers within clubs in that league who get it, who see the benefits. There will also be some who think, no, this is just why would I do anything that's not self-serving? Why would I give? And I also understand that, because football over the last 20, 30 years has become a kind of capitalist, like late capitalist dream, right? And in that dream, people don't vote for the greater good. I think there's also an argument from those clubs, and I'm more sympathetic to this. If you just give more money to the Championship and League One and League Two, we'll see what has happened over the last 2 or 3 years, which is simply that money will go into more higher wages for players, agents' fees, transfer fees. It won't actually make it more sustainable because everybody's got used to non-sustainability, which is really dangerous. So I think if it does happen, it will have to come with kind of caveats and measures. That the whole aim of this is to keep the English football pyramid as sustainable as possible, so that all those clubs are there in 20 years' time. And that's the kind of that's been the whole overarching theme of this project, is that I believe that the English football pyramid is England's greatest cultural asset, and we have to protect it, and we can only protect it if we choose to. It doesn't just happen by itself. So these are not easy decisions. These are not things that, I might consider myself an expert, but I don't have all the answers, and I don't think anyone does.
No, I fully agree with you. We'll come on to the Preston game just after this last question. Sunderland, they've bought young, they've tried to upskill, and the model is to sell high, to utilise the academy. That's the way of getting to the Premier League, which is dubbed sustainable. The two teams that come to mind and that Sunderland fans tend to mention quite often are Brighton and Brentford. Do Sunderland feel like that sort of club to you now? They have the potential to go on and emulate those models. Obviously, Brighton and Brentford are very far advanced in where they are at the moment. The figures that they're paying for players and the level that they're operating is way beyond Sunderland at the moment. But it does feel like Sunderland are trying to sort of create their own version of that in the Championship.
Yeah, and look, they're not alone in doing that, which suggests that it is the right way to do it. I think Sunderland are different to those clubs because there's both a historic level of success, and I'm talking decades and decades and decades ago, and also a relatively recent level of success. And I think that changes the mindset within clubs, and certainly changes the mindset of supporters. At both Brighton and Brentford, there was recent history of being in the fourth tier. There was very much a blank canvas to build from. There weren't, supporter numbers weren't huge when that project began. Expectation wasn't huge. The difference with a club like Sunderland, I think, is that when you are fourth in the Championship, you can smell the Premier League, and it inevitably makes you impatient. That's just human nature because you remember it. Whereas Brighton and Brentford didn't have that. So they were able to, Brentford were able to lose a playoff final, for example, and it not cause everyone to lose their minds and it just be part of the process. They were very much process-driven clubs. I think Sunderland probably slightly struggle with that, but the principles are the same in terms of, scout well, recruit well, buy low, develop well, sell high. They're the kind of 5 principles, 5 pillars of those projects. And Sunderland look to be doing that really well. At the moment they've only really got to the development stage. I think that's fair to say, because they've not felt they needed to sell one of those crown jewels, and that's the hardest bit of those projects, is selling the players, accepting selling them, and then reinvesting well. Because a club like Southampton tried this in the Premier League and were brilliant at it until they weren't, and sold players. And then eventually they bought badly and everything fell apart, and that's how it can happen. So I think I'd say Sunderland are already part way along that road, but they've not done anything wrong so far, and that's lots of other clubs have.
Yeah, that expectation element of Sunderland's psyche really does intrigue me because, within everybody's living memory, pretty much when Sunderland are in the Championship, they are competing. So to finish 16th like they did last season, which was a really poor season, that came with a lot of heat, a lot of scrutiny. And in fairness to Sunderland, they did stick with what they were doing, and they deserve credit for that, in my opinion, although at the time I was probably questioning things quite heavily. We'll move on to the Preston game. Regis Debris went 4-4-2. Preston went 5 at the back. It was an interesting sort of tactical battle. I thought Sunderland, Daniel, probably lost a little bit of control in that midfield. The ball wasn't really sticking. I don't know how much Sunderland you've watched this season, whether you've seen them play 4-3-3 or not. But it was a strange one in the sense that a lot of Sunderland supporters have wanted to see Lebris make that 4-4-2 formation work at home. It did work against Sheffield United earlier on in the season on New Year's Day, but against Preston, I think it showed its fragilities, that formation, when it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, I mean, it relies on being potent with the ball, doesn't it? And I think the danger of I always think with a 4-4-2, you end up having to be more direct, because effectively what you're trying to do is isolate one of the forwards against one of the central defenders. And to do that, you have to get the ball up the pitch quite quickly. That's not something that, and this is not a criticism, just an observation, but that's not something Sunderland always try to do. They like to be able to, pass from side to side, look for space, try and get one of those wide players one-on-one, try and get one of the central midfielders driving forward into space. And that takes time, because teams, particularly those managed by Paul Heckingbottom, are really organised off the ball. And as you alluded to there, I also think out of possession, it did make it slightly easier to play through in midfield. I think because with the 4-4-2, they understood they had to be direct. So they were constantly thinking, we need to win the ball back here. We need to win the ball back. Actually, a really clever opponent can look for the right pass and can pass through you. And as you're trying to win back the ball, suddenly it's 30, 40 yards from your own goal, and you've got far too many men ahead of the ball. I didn't think it really worked. I think it was worth a go, because I don't think Sunderland are going to finish in the top two, and I don't think they're going to finish outside the top six. Therefore, everything now is geared towards peaking in the playoffs. And if that means trying different formations, looking at almost treating games, although fans don't want to hear it, half like training games, so you're trying to work out, right, if we play this opponent in the playoffs, would this formation work? What were the faults? What were the strengths? I'm all for that, because the last thing you want to do is get to a playoff semi-final second leg and think, oh, okay, I think we need to go 4-4-2 here, and no one's played it before, or not played it much. So I think it was worth a go, but yeah, I don't think it really worked.
And what did you make of Sunderland's midfield? You touched a little bit on it then, Daniel. It was a starting midfield of Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham. Joe Bellingham, obviously the more high-profile name in that lineup, but I really like Dan Neil, captaining his boyhood club at 23 years old. I think got over 100 and more appearances for the first team. He's a player I really, really like. And your thoughts on Job as well, actually, because I've really enjoyed watching Job's career arc at Sunderland. It's actually been a pleasure at times. He is brilliant beyond his years. He's wise beyond his years. If I had one small criticism of him, though, it would be that he needs to release the ball a touch quicker. I think that might be the difference between the Championship and the top level. I do think he's got time to work on that, and I do think it'll come. But I just thought it was a little bit noticeable against Preston that the ball stuck in midfield a little bit too long for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He is I think he's a player who looks better when the team is winning than when it's kind of chasing games. Because yeah, especially as soon as you went 1-0 down, that became more noticeable that the ball needed to be moved quicker. We just talked about like direct football and 4-4-2. What it needs is players constantly playing the ball into feet and getting it back. And that happened a few times, but it happened more toward, in your own half, trying to knit together a move than it actually did 30, 40 yards from Preston's goal. So yes, I would agree with that. I really like Dan Neil. I love all those players who I think they add something beyond their ability to a team. They are so much more vital than fans realise. I think they're the sort of players, being kind of sweeping here, I think they're the sort of players that match-going supporters tend to appreciate more than online supporters, because I think you get a sense at a game, you can sort of see what those players are doing off the ball. You can see how they're directing people around them that you just don't get from TV. And teams and squads are worse without those players. They become kind of the managers on the pitch, I think. And yeah, Dan's got that. And yeah, long may they continue. It's really interesting. These are the sort of players that when they come out of the Championship, like I look at, let's say, Ipswich with Sam Morsey and Forest with Ryan Yates. And these are the sort of players that fans think, well, we're going to spend 100 million, so they won't be in the team anymore. And you notice if a team starts badly, suddenly those players gravitate back towards the team and the team becomes stronger again, because it's not just about ability, and all those players, including Dan, have it. It's about kind of attitude and like, yeah, just this sense of connection with the club, and that matters.
Yeah, it does. I'll ask this next question, Dan, sort of without context, because I'm really, really interested to hear what you have to say from a perspective of not watching Sunderland week to week. But what did you make of Anthony Patterson's performance, particularly his kicking? Did it stand out for you for any reason?
I think there is still a sense, even though this has been coming for 3 or 4 years in football in general, I think there is still a hardwired sense that's impossible to shift, where when you are a supporter of a team at the game, you can't not wince when a goalkeeper invites pressure. Like we're just used to that looking like an accident waiting to happen, aren't we? And it's not going to change. So we're going to have to get used to it. Football is not going to change in that sense, I don't think, or certainly not for a while. So we're going to have to get used to it. And I think sometimes that wincing kind of clouds the good things that goalkeepers do with that. He's clearly in inverted commas like a modern goalkeeper, isn't he? He's clearly someone for where that has shifted from does he stop shots going in to is he able to be the first playmaker close to our own goal. There are occasional moments when he does like make me yip a little bit. There was that one where the cross came into the box and he sort of let it hit his knee and it like went 10 yards away from him.
That was a heart in the mouth moment. That really was.
Yeah. I mean, he was. I don't know if he knew that there was no one around, but he was fairly lucky that there wasn't anyone else in the penalty area because it went, as I say, it went sort of 5-10 yards away from him, and then he kind of gobbled it up and started again. But I think that comes from the fact that they're taught that as soon as the cross comes in, they're thinking, "Where's the next pass? Where's the quick ball out?" And you do need those goalkeepers to be quick because I've seen teams this season where they're trying to play that passing out from the football, and the goalkeeper's clearly absolutely not comfortable in any way with it. And I'm talking more League One, League Two here. And it really slows down the game. It really makes it so much easier for that team to defend against because by the time the goalkeeper's like picked his pass and worked out what he's doing, oppositions are in their shape, and it's really hard to defend against those shapes. So, yeah, I feel for him a little bit because it does sort of still feel in the stadium like people are thinking, "Oh no, is this going to work out? Is he going to make a mistake?" Which is kind of unfair because other than that one little drop and pick up, he didn't really make a mistake at all.
Yeah, and in terms of howlers this season or mistakes directly resulting in a goal, it's very, very minimal, to be honest. I think obviously when you're a goalkeeper, everything's magnified, isn't it? It really, really is. I do think he needs to possibly work on command in his area a little bit better. I think his distribution is just standard for a championship goalkeeper. I think with Patterson, we perhaps thought that he had a higher ceiling than maybe he does. Perhaps he'll kick on again. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it just feels like he's stagnated a little bit. However, he is still a fantastic shot stopper and very competent, in my opinion, in the championship. I do find it fascinating, though, Daniel, that when you're a homegrown player, the psychology of that with fans, there always seems to be a moment with a homegrown player or a little spell where fans are sort of increasingly on the back more than they would an external player. It's weird, that, isn't it? Have you noticed that generally just around the clubs over the years?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's certainly true at my own club. I mean, also with Anthony, he's got this thing, and it won't be a conscious thing, but there's definitely an element of, right, Sunderland, England's #1 goalkeeper for most of the last decade, is a Sunderland lad who came through the team. Inevitably, that creates this pressure of like, we want to find the next Jordan Pickford. We want Anthony breaks into the team, and suddenly we're like, that's who we want him to be. He wants to be this kind of, he wants to be the best goalkeeper in the country, which Jordan has been for quite a long time. So that doesn't help. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That I think it's because with other players, with players who come in, particularly those from abroad, I still think we try and work out, is this a player who's going to show as he cares with skill? Is he going to show as he cares through like heart and endeavour? And with those homegrown players or those club players, that's like the heart and endeavour is taken as a given. So we end up overly focusing on like, how skillful are they? Like, are they technically good enough? Like, are they doing everything right? It's really harsh because inevitably they're in the team for a reason. Series of repeatedly different managers often have picked this player for a reason. It's not because they think, oh yeah, he's got mates that sit in the stands or his family come to watch every game. It's because they think they're good enough. So let's probably try and cut them some slack, I guess.
Yeah, I do feel for Patterson. You mentioned the Pickford thing and the expectations surrounding that, but he's actually been sort of pushed in the minds of Sunderland fans by Matty Young, who's 18-year-old England international. He's out on loan at Salford at the moment. He broke into their team earlier this season. He isn't being played at the moment, but by all accounts, he's the sort of next cab off the rank. And a lot of the comments amongst Sunderland supporters are, sell Patterson, get Young in, and all of that. It's never that simple. Young's a very, very inexperienced goalkeeper, but he's probably got it from both ends, which is unfortunate. Let's talk about that time-wasted incident in the second half, Daniel. I feel it would be remiss of us not to touch on that. I honestly thought that was extraordinary. I don't tend to get that vexed because you're trying to be professional and you're trying to just get your head down and report on what's in front of you. But I was livid, to be honest. I mean, Ryan Porteous goes down, for those who haven't seen it, in Sunderland's penalty area. The game sort of continues for a couple of seconds. The referee then pulls it back for a head injury. As soon as the referee blows his whistle, Porteous is straight up. There's then a couple of instances of more time wasted with substitutions. Sunderland are trying to get players, Preston players off the pitch. Mepham and I think 09 had a little word with the referee. Then you have this extraordinary situation where Preston weren't ready to make a substitution, but the game was still stopped. And then Preston also had 12 players on the pitch at one point. It felt like referee Lewis Smith just sort of lost control of it all. It was bizarre. And I think, he did add it on in the end. He added it on in 9 minutes, but I think we counted about 5 minutes lost in the game. It was It was bizarre. What was your take on it?
Yeah, all season, I've noticed the whole goalkeeper going down for team talk, and I've noticed more and more this sort of incredibly blatant just, oh, I'm going to go down. I'm just going to sit down, and knowing that the referee has to stop the game. And to be honest, I felt for Lewis Smith because I don't think there's anything he can do. I don't think it's instructive that Ryan Porteous went down with a head injury, right? So that meant that he had to stop the game because he can't. If it had been a potential muscle injury or cramp, he could have just played on. That's his discretion, and fine. But once it's a head injury, he has to stop the game. Even though I don't think particularly there was anything wrong with Ryan Porteous, but he doesn't know that, and we don't know that, quite frankly. And he did come off, fine. But once that happens, you're then not allowed to restart the game until everybody is ready, 11v11. And Preston and Paul Heckingbottom is a kind of wily manager at this. We know this. And it was just this bizarre series of events, as you say. And I suspect, the referees and the fourth official were saying we need to get going here. Come on. But again, there's effectively nothing you can do. The only thing you could do is try and book someone for time wasting. But there was so many different moving parts or non-moving parts where people sat down that it sets a precedent if you book a player and say, I think you're faking this injury, and the player then goes off. And I just think it's really hard to do. But yeah, I watched it thinking, A, this is absolute madness, and B, but I also thought this could happen at every game I go and watch. Having seen that, right, let's face it, the saving grace in all this is that 2 minutes after Preston shamefully wasted 5 minutes of a game, they then conceded an absolute screamer because they weren't particularly organised out of possession, which is I'm non-biased this season, but I was thanks for that happening, because you've been punished for what you've done. So that was good. That was good karma. But God, it was so frustrating. Even as a neutral, I was this is so nothing is happening. People are just sat waiting, and as you say, 1 minute became 2, became 3, became 4, became 5, and I was this is this is the third of a half time we've been waiting for game play to restart. It was extraordinary.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting actually that sort of Regis Lebris was asked about it, and he had a little bit of a joke that it would be difficult to play against 12 men, referencing when Preston have 12 players on the pitch. But Paul Heckingbottom actually was vexed after the game with the referee, because I think Preston actually conceded when they had one less player on the field. So very rarely do you get both managers fuming at the same referee decision, which I thought was interesting. That goal, though, that you mentioned, Romain Mundle, was fantastic. A brilliant strike. He's obviously a former Tottenham player. Did a magnificent job earlier on in the season of replacing Jack Clarke, who went to Ipswich Town for very big money. From a Sunderland perspective, struggled with injury issues as well, but now he's back. How impressed were you with Romain Mundle?
It was one of the best goals I've seen this season. You sat where we are in the press box at Sunderland. You sat right behind that. You can see the curl. You could see Woodman kind of look as if to think, he barely dive properly because he was just like, I'm just not going to get there. The curl and the whip on the ball, the pace at which he did it as well. It wasn't just a kind of speculative curling shot. He was kind of whipping that into the top corner. Looked beautiful as it comes off the post. It was, as I say, it's one of the best goals I've seen this season. He's a kind of fits and starts player. A series of youth coaches have absolutely loved his ability. There's no doubt that the peak of his power is really, really high. He just needs to find that consistency, and in his defence, there have been injury issues that have like stopped that happening for a consistent basis. He's not had a full run in the team enough, but yeah, he's a kind of perfect off the bench player, I guess, in like playoff situations, right? In that you think if you need a goal, he can create a spark out of nothing, and it might not work, but yeah, last night it was. Yeah, I mean, it was a ridiculous goal in terms of the power and whip at the same time. And Woodman, you often think like, is a keeper badly positioned? Have they not got the diving quick enough? But it's just completely unsavable.
Yeah, it was a great strike. We'll start rounding off the podcast, Daniel, because I know you've got travelling to do. But tell me, where are you going next, and where can we read your piece on Sunderland? When's that due?
Yeah, so as I say, 77 was last night. I'm at QPR Leeds on Saturday lunchtime, and then we enter international break. So I think it's Carlisle after that on the 22nd, the following weekend. And
Carlisle are an interesting story at the moment as well. Actually, there might be some traction.
There's a number of clubs, like, to let you behind the curtain. There's a number of clubs that I've kind of pushed and waited till the end of the season for obvious reasons. Sunderland ended up being one because of weather, but actually works really nicely, I think. And the bottom of League Two, like, I've not done Tranmere yet, and I've not done Carlisle yet, and that's for obvious reasons, because there are things happening at those clubs that are blowing supporters' minds. So yeah, that's a good one to get to. And yeah, the Sunderland piece is going to be out in a couple of weeks. I want to do it properly, so I'll always, I'll speak to supporters. I will kind of work out the lie of the land. It's nice to get to do a wholly positive piece about Sunderland, if I can make that joke, because I've written about them plenty of times over the last decade, and quite often you just want to shake the club and say, there's so much potential here. Look at what you've got. Look at how you can make the most of it. Look at the academy. Look at the ground. Look at everything. Like, how are you not getting this right? And I honestly believe, whatever happens for the rest of the season, I honestly believe that they are getting it right now, which is really nice. I don't want to be this kind of grim reaper going around the country to Tranmere and Carlisle and saying, oh God, this is broken and this owner's bad. It's nice to be able to do the opposite.
Absolutely. And tell us where we can find you on social media and your work more generally as well.
Yeah, so I'm at the website is theipaper.com. You can search for Doing the 92 Daniel Storey, and I'm on X at Daniel Storey 85.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining me, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. I wish you luck with the rest of the ground hopping for the rest of the season. Thank you to the listener for joining us. You can head over to the Sunderland Network website for all the latest ahead of the Coventry game. Make sure you check out Daniel's work as well.